Chapter 2. When Adrianne woke, she felt the throb of something on her buttocks. She thought she was covered by the bear rug, but it was the paws and body of the large white wolf lying close behind her. She could smell his body, strong with a slight musk, but it was more the smell of a fresh lake and pine trees. She glanced down and noticed that his penis had stretched out of its sheath. Could he smell me, she wondered. But of course he could, you fool. Wolves can smell and hear like no other animals, that's why they're so dangerous. It was time for her cycle, and she was ovulating. What was she to do? She glanced at him, and found he was still in the same position, only his body was closer to her. She was afraid to move an inch. Slowly she reached round and moved his paw from her breasts. He still slept silently. Maybe she had given him too many painkillers, and he was anesthetized. That had to be it. She stood, stretched, and checked to see how the weather was faring. Still the snow was falling. Starting her routine over, she gave the animal antibiotics, cleaned his wounds, fed him, and watched him sleep, watching for signs of recovery, and if the snow didn't let up, her next plan, keep him sedated. She hoped this routine would last long enough for her to leave, and for him to get well. The cave grew colder in the evenings. She ran out of wood to make a fire. Looking around, she thought of burning a chair. She tried reading, but her teeth shivered loud and the wolf stirred. Remembering the furs in the bedroom, she dragged them and piled all the animal pelts and skins from the bedrooms into the great room. Not only was she cold, but the wolf was cold as well. She threw all the furs on him and crawled underneath too. She still couldn't get warm, so she moved closer to him. He felt so good. He inched behind her and wrapped his long front legs across her body. She heard him sigh like a man satisfied. Could I keep him as a pet, she thought. But she couldn't keep something wild and that large without people thinking she was crazy. It was like keeping a lion. And she didn't have the money to feed him, and looking at his cock, he would require a female wolf just to keep him calm. Maybe I could keep him if he was castrated, she thought. Makes sense, Adrianne. You've been in the wilderness too long. Her mind eventually ran out of crazy ideas, and she fell sound asleep. Throughout the night, she felt his nose snuggle under her hair and smell it, as a man would with his partner. Then she thought about Paul. He never even acted as if he loved her. He never wanted to sleep behind her and snuggle up with her. And here she was with an animal that showed more love than many humans could. She thought herself stupid for comparing Paul to this animal. She turned to verify her insane thoughts and realized how unbelievably beautiful this animal was, especially since she had cleaned up his coat and polished his razor teeth and kept his eyes clean and clear. She took a closer look at his long dark lashes covering his cobalt eyes. She had never seen animals, especially dogs, with blue eyes. Do dogs have lashes, she wondered. Some did have blue eyes, but thick black lashes, she'd never seen that before. I'm a cat person. He must be what she had heard of, the lone alpha wolf, and his pack must be frantic about his return. I'm thinking and talking like he's a man, Adrianne said. She stood and walked to get something to eat. Tired of the smoked meat, she found some peaches and vegetables in cans. After eating her food, she turned with a plate in hand, in the direction of the room where the wolf slept. He wasn't there. Had the sedatives worn off and he'd left? Which would be a relief, but somehow she would miss him. Turning in a circle, she placed the food on the floor next to the rugs. Heading in the direction of the rooms, a noise frightened her. She turned to run to the ice-covered opening of the cave. She heard a noise coming from behind her. A man said, "Where are you going?" His voice was not threatening, his tone gentle but strong. Pivoting around, she saw a naked man over 6 feet, large chest with a span like an eagle. His black silky hair was straight, and his eyes flashed blue like azure fire. His hair framed a handsome rugged face. Adrianne could tell by how he held his face firm and thrust it forward, and the way his head was held high, he had a stubborn streak. "Who are you, and what are you doing in here?" Adrianne questioned, her voice shaking. "I should ask you the same thing. Do you realize that this is my home?" the man said. Adrianne couldn't take her eyes off his firm, strong, amazing chest. And that handsome face. His crystal blue eyes and dark hair confused her. And why was he naked? "It's freezing outside, and here you stand before me naked," she said to the splendid-looking man. "Haven't you seen a naked man before?" he said, narrowing his eyes. "It's my home, and I can walk around however I please." "Yes, I've seen naked men before, but never one with such a large." Her eyes fell to his cock, and she stuttered when she tried to describe his body part, but her eyes couldn't or wouldn't leave his manhood. She glanced around. "I don't think this is your place, and where are the snow tracks?" she asked. "You ask too many questions for a female?" He moved in her direction, and Adrianne stepped back in horror. "I'm not going to rape you, if that's what you're thinking." He extended his long arm, reaching for the deerskin to cover his body. "No, that wasn't what I was thinking at all." It was what she had feared. "Where's that beautiful wolf?" "Please don't tell me you slaughtered him," she said, fuming at the thought of him doing such a thing. "He left," he said calmly. "But how? There are no tracks of any kind." She stood looking around suspiciously, her brown eyes meeting his. "I said before, you talk too much. I'm hungry. Now get me something to eat." "I'm not doing any such thing." "If you want food, get it yourself," Adrianne said defiantly. He moved near her and looked down on her 5'6" height and barely 100 pounds. If he wanted to take her and do whatever he wanted to her, she couldn't stop him. But he's trying to intimidate me, she thought. She didn't want to push him into doing anything he wouldn't want to do. Besides, who would live out in such an isolated place, unless he was a fugitive? Yet the thought crossed her mind that he could be a werewolf. She dismissed that as soon as it entered her head. It must be the delusion of too many nights in this cave, and too many books on werewolves. Why would anyone stock their shelves of nothing but tales about werewolves, unless they were completely psychotic? Just like those guys who pretended they were vampires when the book Twilight came out. "I'd better humor him," she murmured. She backed out and walked to the entrance of the kitchen, grabbed a half of duck, opened a can of vegetables, put it on a plate, and brought it out to him. He looked at it and turned his head. "What's wrong now?" she said. "I don't eat duck. My younger brother is into fowl. I'm a red meat eater. Get me something else." She turned and rushed to the kitchen and pulled out a large piece of venison. Then, she remembered that he said something about a brother. She became frightened. Standing in front of him, she said, "You mentioned a brother." She looked at him and slammed the plate with the meat down in front of him. He pushed the vegetables onto the floor, picked up the meat, and began to eat it with his hands. Adrianne put her hands on her hips and said, "I hope you know you don't have a slave. You're going to clean that up." He kept eating and looked up at her with his incredible blue eyes, eyes she had seen before. "I have brothers," he said, glaring at her. "Do they live here with you?" "Yes. Sometimes." "Then that's why there are so many bedrooms." She paused, careful not to look at him. "Will they be here soon?" she said quietly. "Is there anything else you want to know?" he said in a gruff voice, looking up at her, then putting his head down, tearing the meat with his gleaming white teeth. "Get me some water." "How many brothers do you have?" she said, looking at him. "Get me some water," he said again. "I'm not your slave, get it yourself." He stood up, towering over her. He must have been 6'2", and it was all muscle. Then she saw the wound on his arm. Touching it, he flinched. "Where did you get that?" He glared at her with narrowed eyes, and Adrianne rushed away. She brought back a ladle and a large bowl filled with water, and the first aid kit. "When are your brothers coming back?" she tried again. The thought of 3 large men in such an enclosed space brought back bad memories. He glared at her, then he took the ladle, scooped up water from the bowl and drank while he watched her with hungry lust in his eyes and a closed smile. Adrianne backed up. "Can you help me get out of this valley?" she asked. "Why would I help you?" he said, still looking at her with a suspicious smile. "Because you are a decent human being. On the contrary, I'm only half human, and the other half says that I will need you soon." "What do you mean only half human, and that you will need me soon?" she said, locking eyes with him. "We will need you. My brothers and I will need you." His words were ominous and vague. "You will have to wait until they return, then if you want to go you are free to leave. They will have to give their approval," he said to her with a smirk. "What do you mean, their approval? I'm not a side of beef, or a deer you're hunting for food." He smiled at the connection. "No. You're too skinny," he said, walking close and touching her arms. "Living in this cave, you have lost a few pounds." She pulled her arm free. "My brothers will only come when the snow stops. I can't wait that long. Don't you have a car?" "I have many cars, but not here. What you see is my home away from home." He raised his head and let out a howling laugh. Her eyes narrowed. "You're trying to frighten me. I still need to get home. My mother and father and my fiancé will be worried." Wilder's brow furrowed into rows. "What is this about a fiancé? Why would this man of yours let you travel alone in a car at night?" he said. "That is not your concern, and what were you doing following me?" "How dare you?" she said, pointing her finger. "You were driving erratically. It's a wonder you didn't kill yourself. I broke the window of your car so you could climb out, and I got this scar from that." He pointed to the scar, now in its last stage of healing. "I should have left you there," he said with a raised eyebrow, trying to look menacing. "You did leave me," Adrianne said. "Yes, but I kept the animals from eating that scrawny body of yours. Don't you ever eat?" "I can't eat that meat without some preparation, and you have no seasoning I like." "And why are you so concerned about my diet and health?" "Because soon I will have to mate, and because of this snow you are the only female around." Why is he talking like that, she wondered. Maybe he has been in the wilderness too long. "What? You talk like you and I have no choice in the matter. Don't you have some self-control? You said yourself that I'm too skinny. How can you mate with me with that enormous thing you have between your legs?" "I can't." "Enough of this," he said, gazing at Adrianne. "Don't you realize that I'm a werewolf?" "Get the fuck out of here," Adrianne said, bursting out laughing. "That's right. I'm going to claim you whether you want me to or not," he said, low, calm and easy. "You'll do no such thing." She backed up against the wall of the cave. He looked at her, amused. A smile played across his lips. Adrianne smiled back. "You're just joking, aren't you? There are no werewolves, and you're not going to fuck me, and you don't have to mate with me, do you?" He lay down on the bare rug, then he closed his eyes, and fell asleep with Adrianne looking at him. She had placed some of the pain pills in the water, so he would sleep for a while, giving her time to get away, because she knew now that she was dealing with a deranged individual. With just her leggings, worn boots, and a large fur coat covering half of her naked body, she gathered up some of the animal pelts and placed them around her face and head and ran to the opening of the cave. She hit the frozen water with a hammer, and it left a large hole where she climbed through. Standing in the opening, weighing her options, she decided to risk the snow. Wrapping small furs around her feet, she was ready to brave the unknown. It was slow going at first, but she thought she would be miles away when that handsome, crazy man woke. Breathing hard and feet almost frozen, she saw a clearing, so she kept walking. Making it through the frozen grass, she saw lots of trees. She trudged along, and before she could get into the forest, A large black bear with a cub lumbered out of the path between the pines, then stood still, looking at her. Adrianne backed up slowly. The black bear gazed at her. She appeared hungry, and Adrianne glanced down. It wasn't safe to fix her gaze with a bear with a cub. She backed up slowly, giving herself time. Time for what, she thought. Then she heard a wolf in a distance. His loud cry sent chills through her body. She looked up, and standing on a ledge of a hill was the large white wolf. He put his head down and began racing in her direction. She tried running, but the bear began a mad surge in her direction. Two predators fighting over the same skinny corpse, she imagined. Praying and wondering why she didn't stay with the wolf and take her chances with him, she dropped into the snow from exhaustion, and before she passed out she prayed that her death would be quick. From reading the books in the cave, she figured that if the large wolf got to her first, he would puncture her neck at the jugular vein, and that would be that, a quick death. Which death would be better, she asked herself before fainting. Neither one would be pretty, she thought.